my name is Maria, and today I'm going to be showing you some basic knife skills and techniques. To begin, you always want to make sure that you have a sharp knife, because a sharp knife can easily cut through the food, whereas a dull knife could easily slip off the food and then you could cut your fingers. So actually having a sharp knife is less dangerous than using a dull knife. Also, you always want to make sure that you use a wooden cutting board, because when you use stone or metal cutting boards, it could actually dull your knife, which could then be dangerous. Now today I've already sharpened this knife, but just a bit of advice. After you sharpen your knife, there could be little fragments still left on the knife from when you sharpen it, so you always want to make sure you wipe off and disinfect your knife before you use it, because you don't want those metal fragments getting in your food. Now, the first technique that I'm going to show you today is a chiffonade. A chiffonade cut is usually used with leafy green flat vegetables that are rolled up and then sliced into long thin strips. These are normally used for spinach, lettuce, and it's normally used to put them in salads or to use them to flavor soups. So today I have some spinach, and that's what we're going to use to do the chiffonade. So to begin, you just want to roll up the spinach. Now, the length of the spinach chiffonades depends on the width and length of how you cut them. Whenever you cut anything, you always want to make sure that you hold it, you use the knife with your dominant hand, and you curl your fingers in so that you can't cut off your fingertips. Now I'm going to do pretty big chiffonade cuts because this is going to be used for a soup. You always want to rock the knife back and forth instead of picking it up. You move your fingers back with the knife and make sure to keep your thumb out of the way of the knife blade. Now see, these are pretty long chiffonade cuts, and these would be used to flavor a soup or to put in a salad with a bunch of mixed greens. The next technique that I'm going to show you is just a coarse chop. I'm going to use celery for this today, but a coarse chop can be used with almost anything. A coarse chop is used when you don't actually have to have actual size measurements of the cuts. It's, well, a coarse chop. So today I'm going to use celery, which could be used for flavoring a soup. You could use it in casseroles, really anything with a coarse chop. To begin with celery, you always want to make sure you take off the end pieces. And some people use these for cooking, but for the cutting we're not. Then you want to make sure you cut off the end pieces. And then to coarsely chop, there's no exact measurements, and you're not measuring or doing it any certain way. You're just coarsely chopping. But make sure to keep your blade on the cutting board instead of picking up and chopping like this. Now with a coarse chop, a lot of people just might leave it like this, and some people might even need the piece to be a little bit smaller for the chop. So then you can rock the knife back and forth on the cutting board and chop it up into smaller pieces. Because remember, a coarse chop is not uniform pieces. And then if you wipe off the blade, always wipe down, never up, to not cut your fingers. Now, the last technique that I'm going to show you is a julienne, which is also referred to as a matchstick. Julienne is when you cut the vegetable or whatever it is that you're cutting. Most often it's used with potatoes, carrots, sometimes apples, to make it into a matchstick length. So with a carrot, I've already cleaned this carrot, and what you're going to do is you just cut off the ends. And then this I'm actually going to use to show you a fourth technique, so I'm just going to cut it in half for this and save this piece for later. Now for the carrot, since it's a circle, but you want to get matchsticks, which are really just long, thin strips for cutting, we're going to cut the carrot in half. And then you always lay it the flat side down, because a circle, which is what a carrot is, it's going to rock back and forth when you're trying to cut it. So always make sure that you cut it in half so that you have a flat side to put down on the cutting board. And now for the julienne, we're just going to cut it in long strips. Now we have long pieces like this, and sometimes this works for people, and other times they want them just a little bit smaller because they're going to be in soup, or they even want them small enough to be able to use as a garnish in a salad. So then we would just take the one big one that we have, and we would just cut it, julienne it into even smaller pieces. Now these look more like the ones that you would use in a salad, or a salad you would get from a restaurant. Now the last technique I'm going to show you is just an oval cut. Sometimes people use this for their carrots they just want to saute their carrots, or even they just want big chunks of carrots in their salad. So for that cut, you take your regular carrot without cutting it in half first, and you find the most sturdy side of the carrot to put it down on, since we're not cutting it to a flat surface. And then for this one you can do small skinny cuts, which give you little thin circles, or you could do bigger cuts if you're using it to flavor a soup or a chicken broth or something. And you have bigger cuts. So there's 4 different knife techniques that I've showed you, and we've got the julienne, which you just roll the spinach and then you cut up, and that can be used with lettuce and even sometimes whole basil or parsley leaves. And then I showed you how to do just a coarse chop, which I use celery, but you could also do that with even carrots, or some people do it with onions to make a mirepoix, which is carrots, celery, and onion put together to flavor a soup. And then I also showed you a julienne and a small julienne. A julienne was just cutting it into like matchstick type length, and a smaller julienne would make finer, thinner pieces of carrot. A lot of people use it also with potatoes to make their own homemade French fries. And then the last cut that I showed you was the oval cut, or just a circle cut, and that's used with carrots to make it for salads or thicker ones to use in your soups. And then they also can use it with potatoes for big circles, and people use that to fry and even make saute or make home fries with. So that's all the knife techniques I have for you. And then I also showed you to make sure you always use a sharp knife, not a dull knife. Make sure your cutting board is wooden. Make sure you always clean the knife before you start cutting. Thank you.